going to be accepting questions through chat. We will be accepting questions through Q&A. I'm Kristin Young. I'm the clinical director of the Herren Project. I'm also a licensed independent clinical social worker in the state of Massachusetts. And Maureen?
I'm the founder of Magnolia New Beginnings and a family recovery coach and an interventionist. And I also co-host a podcast called Collateral Damage.
Awesome. So we already have one question that I can throw out there from a gentleman named Paul. He's 11 years sober. He does AA, goes to therapy, tries to do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera. His older brother is an active alcoholic. He's watching him kill himself. His parents are heartbroken as they're trying to fix things, which is very common. I don't know what role, if any, I should be playing in this. He's married with 2 daughters. His health is awful. And at age 49, if I learned he died today of a heart attack, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm so sorry, Paul.
That's so hard.
It's hard to watch, but I also know unless he's willing to make a change, there's not much I can do. How hard do I push, if at all? It's a good question. Lots of people are there. You want to take a crack at it, Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I had a client today and I just got, it was the same thing. She's not even in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, we have Section 35. So sometimes if somebody is a danger to themselves or others, you can try to get them into treatment, although it's not, a slam dunk. They have to jump through all kinds of hoops and prove that they really are a danger to themselves or others. And, but this woman was out of the state of Massachusetts, so she didn't even have that option. And I think when you're there, the only thing that you can do is try to stay within the sphere of influence in a loving way, because if you're able to. So some people don't feel like they can do any more than talk about getting into treatment if that is, it's too hard on them. So they choose either not to speak to the person or only speak to them when they're talking about going into treatment. But this woman and I think many, many family members can do this, and I think the best thing to do is just to pull them close. You don't have to move in with them. You don't have to have them over for a Sunday dinner, but you can call and check on them and tell them you care about them and let them know that they're loved. And sometimes that's the only thing you can do. And every once in a while, and then maybe the door will open to have that conversation about going to treatment.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd also highly encourage, and I'm sure you've already done this, Paul, but I just want to make sure I say it, your parents to learn as much as they can about substance use disorder. If you can, buy them books, drop it on their counter and leave. Whatever information you can steer them towards support groups if they're willing. Tons of support groups right now online. And if they're on Facebook, Maureen's Magnolia New Beginnings website will show them very clearly that they're not alone and a place for them to ask questions. I find that people tend to do the best and tend to reach out for treatment sooner when families learn about addiction and about what works.
Great point. Great point. Do you have any books that you recommend?
For families dealing with substance use disorder, your book is one of the ones I recommend. Maureen's book, If You Love Me, is awesome. She did not pay me to say that.
That was not like a...
No, I know, but I'm being sincere. That actually, your book is actually one of the ones. We bought it at the Herren Project for my support group and sent it out to everybody, and we had a discussion about it afterwards. Saving Jake by D.M. Burwell is another really, really good one. And if I see people severely struggling with codependency, which oftentimes we do see here, which is the fix. When I hear you say, Paul, that your parents want to fix everything, usually when we see that, there's some codependency involved. The term was actually coined because of relationships between family members or loved ones and substance use disorder. But Codependent No More is like the Bible for families who are trying to learn about codependency. I've read it myself, for myself. So.
I know that Beverly Conyers' book, Addict in the Family, always gets mentioned too. I haven't read it, but I know that, that I hear that a lot. And also there's a website called alliesinrecovery.net, I believe. And if you go on there with a Massachusetts zip code, which It's not a secret. So if you want to find a Massachusetts zip code and you're not in Massachusetts, I'm not going to tell anybody, but that's the promo code. And you go onto the website and use that promo code, and you can watch, I think it's, I forget how many, it's the segments of craft. It's like a,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's really good. And that is a very loving way of bringing somebody in.
Right.
I think it's outdated, and I think that, and they, you know, there's groups around that have kind of done their own version, but I think it's a little outdated and a little, it was really meant for women. The first study was women that were trying not to, they were trying to get their husbands into treatment. Their husbands were drinking too much. They were on an army base, and their biggest concern was domestic violence. So that's who, you know what I mean? That's how old it is. It's like 50 years ago. Not that that still doesn't happen, but you know, I think that things are different 30 years ago than when this was first put together. But it's Allies.
I was just going to say that. Can you just mention that again?
Yeah, it's ALLIES, alliesinrecovery.net. And just look for the promo code, because without the promo code, it's a little expensive. But with that promo code, you can, the Massachusetts zip code, you can go and watch those segments. I think there's 10, but I can't remember. And, you know, take what you need and leave the rest, as we say. You know, it doesn't have to, like, maybe, but you might get a little something out of it.
Yep.
So that would be.
There's also another book called We Are the Luckiest. It's a new book that just recently came out by Laura McGowan. It's about her struggle with alcoholism. And this book actually can relate to anybody. We all have struggles in different ways, and she doesn't make it just about substance use, but her story and how she lays it out can be very helpful for families who are trying to understand why their loved one keeps sticking their hand back in the fire over and over and over again. So, okay, we have a question from Aaron. Spouse is newly out of treatment where he spent 60 days. He's struggling so naturally. I am too. Yeah. Help. Totally get it, Aaron. I'm dealing with my own stress and anxiety around this and not sure how to support him. He knows he needs to reach out and stay connected, but he won't. What's my role? You know, and I think this is the one thing we haven't touched upon yet. And it's the boundaries part of it. You can only, Aaron, you can only manage your own behavior. There's only one person's behavior in every situation that we can control, and that's our own. So you can't make him get support. And you, of course, are dealing with anxiety, and I totally understand. And I think what we tend to try to do is manage our anxiety by trying to control the other person, because we want them to change their behavior so we don't have to feel anxious anymore. And that's really not their role. It's our role to manage our own anxiety. And trust me, I get it. Having been a spouse myself, I totally understand. You're in a position where you could lose everything because you're so tied to that person. But that doesn't change the fact that we can't control them. So you have to set your boundaries in what you need in order for you to feel safe. And then you have to figure out what the consequences are and just make sure that those consequences are something you can follow through on. So if you're not going to leave him, if he doesn't start getting support, don't say you're going to leave him. Start smaller. You know, tell him that you're not sure that you can feel safe with him, and you need some space and time to think. There's different ways that you can set boundaries without having to go all the way. But I would highly suggest you get yourself into some sort of supported situation with some sort of counselor, therapist, life coach. You know, and Ken had suggested Learn to Cope. Support groups are awesome. Learn to Cope is one awesome support group. I'm pretty sure they're doing online meetings. We at the Herren Project also do online meetings. They're all run by licensed clinicians. They're all free. So reach out there and find some support for yourself. And Maureen, I'll let you, you know, talk about the resources you guys offer, but you also offer resources for families.
Sure, yeah. If you go to magnolianewbeginnings.org, there's a list of all the, I think it's in the What We Do tab. There's a list of all the support groups in there online on Facebook 24/7. The national group I would suggest for somebody, and their state group if there's one available. But it's really wonderful because, I mean, even in the national group, we have, I don't know, 1,500 people. And when you have 1,500 people in a group, and it's a closed group, so you have to request to join. You have to answer some questions, very simple questions. Are you supporting someone with a substance use disorder? That kind of question. And when you're in, you can ask or vent or just talk about what you're going through. And you're going to get 30, 40 people that are going to, you know, address what they went through as it relates to you. If you have a question, people answer at 2:00 in the morning. And that's what I love about the group, because, and they're so kind, because this disease definitely rubs all your hard edges off, after you've gone through this with somebody. So they're the kindest group of people too. They're really amazing, and they know stuff.
Yeah.
So
getting support from people who have been there, there's really nothing that can compare to it.
Yeah. And when we talk about that too, I just wanted to mention something where there's a lot of groups out there, and some of them have a very hard line about throwing people out and cutting people off. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right, because it depends on whether it's wrong or right for the person. So you want to go into a group and test it out. And if you go to a meeting and and that is your mindset, and everybody's saying, no, put a warm blanket on them, make them a cup of tea. Not that anybody would say, but if that's what they're saying something completely up, try another group. Try the same type of group in another area. Or, same thing with the Facebook groups and the online groups, because you have to decide kind of what your mindset is, or be open to lots of different people's ideas, and then decide what your point of view is, because there is no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the most part.
Right. And just to answer your question, Teresa, groups, you go to the Herren Project website, go to the families page, and there's virtual family support groups. We were virtual long before COVID. We've been doing that for a long time. They're all run by licensed clinicians. They're all free. There is Learn to Cope. They have a website. Their website, I believe, is learn2cope.org, I believe. There is Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. There's you go into the 12-step genre, and there's a bunch of this Families Anonymous, I believe, in 12-step. There's so many different ones. And obviously Maureen, was just talking about Magnolia New Beginnings, and that's that's Facebook.
And that's, I think there's the Smart Recovery meetings, some family meetings, and they use the craft model too. So,
yep.
So there's a lot out there.
Right. And definitely check out a bunch of different ones. I think that's so super important, what Maureen said.
Don't run out there saying, oh my God, I'm not going back because of what they said. A different place or a different meeting, even the same group, could be totally different.
Right. Absolutely. Do you want to read the next question?
I'm looking on both sides. So we're looking in the Q&A of the chat.
The Q&A.
What if they're homeless with no cell phone, has been sectioned and currently sectioning again, in and out of recovery for 8 years and can't give support? Oh my goodness. How many people are going through that? I've been there, so I know exactly what that feels like. Homeless. I actually always provided a cell phone for her, just because I wanted her to be able to call me. So, and a lot of people would, this is because this was, people said that was enabling to me. And I felt like it was enabling if I was doing it for her, but if I was doing it for me, it wasn't enabling. So, and then people said, oh, well, she'll call her drug dealer, or she'll do illegal things with the phone. So she was going to do that anyhow. So I always provided a cheap cell phone for her, just so she could get me if she needed me. It gave me a little peace of mind. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to go through those things for a very long time. And I sectioned my daughter many times. She was in over 40 treatment centers, overdosed to the point of death. 13 times I brought her to the hospital. God only knows how many other times. So I totally understand how painful that is. Don't give up hope. She's got 3 years now. She's back to herself. She's better than she probably, if this had never happened to her, she's a better person now for having gone through all this. Everybody told me, you got to get ready for this, the inevitable. And I continually told her at any time possible that I loved her. And that was really all I could do. I mean, of course, I tried to do every crazy thing in the book, and that's why there's a book. But I mean,
she really did. If you get a chance to read her book, she did do a lot of crazy things.
And I'm crazy too. So they were really crazy things.
Which is why I love it so much, because it's very true and real, and how most of us are in those situations.
Not giving away the end of but by the end, I realized that the only person, like you said earlier, it was excellent advice, is that the only person in any control of it was me. All the other stuff I was doing to manage my own anxiety. I love the way you put that. And it was true because none of they didn't work. And I kept seeing them not working, not working, not working. Didn't stop me from continuing to do them until I finally, and it took a long time. And then there was still a lot of pain, even after I realized that. So this is probably, I can't think of too many other things that are worse to go through for a parent.
I totally agree. I
But
think this is
don't give
honestly
up.
the worst disease for a parent
Yeah.
because and most other and all us loved ones, but it's the only disease where we can't wrap our love around them 24 hours a day. It's everything that we want to do deep down in our heart because we know they're sick doesn't tend to work, and that's why
And
it's so
sometimes
hard.
it hurts, right?
Right. So you have to go and do things that feel almost counterintuitive to what you want to do. And I'm never one that says just kick them out. That's never my thing. But at some point, you know, and Tony, it seems like Tony and Lori, you guys already are here. At some point, you have to put boundaries up to protect yourself. So one of the things that I always like to make sure I point out is it's not to punish. So oftentimes we get so angry that we do things because we want to punish them for what they're doing. And we really need to try to step out of that and put boundaries up that it's more to give them natural consequences for their use. So if somebody is using heroin in my home, I don't care who they are not going to stay, whether they're my child or not. That's a natural consequence of that choice, right? But we can do it with love. Rainbows and unicorns, I know, but that is the goal.
But you can, and she even now always said, I knew I'd be welcome home if I would stop using drugs because I couldn't have her in my house.
Right.
You know, and so, but even because of the way I did it, she didn't know it then that I was evil and awful and all that kind of stuff.
Course,
but
yeah.
she knows that, you know, at any moment the choice was really hers.
Yeah, and that's actually really, I'm glad you brought that up. I had an entire group last night that was pretty much focused just on this piece, was that feeling when they're actively using and they do those things and they say they hate us and all of that. And it gets through sometimes, and we really feel like it's our fault because they make us feel like it's our fault that they're in this position. And every time we challenge the use, they hate us and we're the most awful people in the world. And you know, just making sure that, you know, you're aware, some of you may not be, that that's a part of the disease. It's part of the brain. The brain is so ill that it thinks it needs the drug like it needs air. So it's trying to protect itself. It's a defense. Wants you to back off because you're challenging the use and it's trying to protect it. So that's not actually innate. They don't hate you. They really don't. And Maureen's point there is a perfect example of that, where that's what her daughter said to her. And I'm sure a lot of you are in that place right now. But once she's in long-term recovery, she never hated her mother.
Oh, yeah, just the opposite.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's hard to hear and hard to like stick with your things. But and then what you said earlier too about don't say it if you don't mean it, because that's consistent, that, you know, lack of consistency where if they wear you down enough, you're gonna give in, is not good for anybody.
Right. And I would rather you not say I'm going to kick you out ever.
Right.
Unless you really mean it and you're going to follow through on it, because all you're doing is teaching them that they can walk all over you and that you're never going to do it. And it makes it 10 times harder when you get to that point where you really need to have them out of your home. It's going to make it a lot harder to have that happen. So I hope we answered your question, Tony. You're in a really difficult position. So I think the short version, just to recap, is just try to love him as much as you can. When you do see him, when you do have contact, if he's on Facebook and you know he checks that every once in a while, go and leave him a message that just says, hey, I'm thinking of you. I love you. I hope you're okay. Doesn't mean that he's allowed back in your house. It doesn't mean none of that other stuff still exists, but we can still love them even when, you know, they're not making good choices and, you know, they're in an awful spot. And that's honestly when they need our love the most. They need our boundaries, but they also need our love.
Good point.
Okay, so from Anonymous, our son is living in a sober house in our town. He's been drug tested. However, we have a feeling he's not doing the right thing. We told him our love is unconditional. However, we can't let him in our home because we don't want to put our family at risk with police issues, etc. Okay, good boundary. However, we did say we will visit at his place or beach, etc. to stay connected. We need help with projects around the house. Is asking him for help a mixed message? What if he needs a ride for groceries? You've been here, Maureen, so I'll let you jump in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there were things that I would do if she was in a sober house. Well, if he's in a sober house in Massachusetts, he qualifies for food stamps. So he should be getting food stamps, and because you're considered homeless in Massachusetts. So I don't know where, and I don't know other regulations in the state, but I would hope that he's getting food stamps and a ride. I would probably do that. I mean, it would be a nice time to bond, I think, to connect. You don't want to not be part of their lives. You just want you want to have rules. If you need help with projects around the house, I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one because she said that he wasn't allowed to the house.
Mm-hmm.
So if I hadn't said that, I think maybe I would say it's okay, but not to give cash, maybe to give money towards rent or something like that.
Right. And I think that goals can be set with our loved ones too. And we need to be careful not to make it about the use itself, but make it about their behavior when they're with you. So I can't control what anybody does outside of my presence,
Mm-hmm.
but I can control what they do in my presence. So if you say, hey, listen, we really want to be able to have you to the house to do some work around the house, but this is what we need to see first in order for us to trust that you can respect that.
I like that.
And give them an opportunity to meet it. You know, when we set expectations, oftentimes they can meet those. You know, it's we have to make it more about behavior than we do about substance. So when you're with me, I don't want any outward sides that you're high. I don't want slurring. I can't deal with nodding, right? Those sorts of things, the things that we see that bug us. Because the reality is, for a lot of our loved ones, they need to use the drug to not be sick. So when we say things like, you need to be sober when you're in my presence, that's almost an impossibility for them at this point. So make it more about what you see, the things that you don't want to see. And obviously use in your home is never okay. So, but set your guidelines of what you need to see with a goal and see if he can meet it. And make sure that you're being honest about your concerns and your worries. Those are natural consequences.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy for him to hear that his parents don't really want him in their house because they don't trust. And we don't want to avoid those conversations because sometimes those are the things that can sort of tip the scale in the favor of sobriety or recovery as opposed to active use.
I think I like that with the goals, but because you don't want to make it feel like it's this endless punishment for what he did, and that there's a way to come out of that. So I like that a lot.
Yeah. You want to read the next one? Starts with my 30-year-old son.
Yep. Anonymous. This is from Anonymous as well. My 30-year-old son has been in and out of rehabs for the past 8 years. He has a dependent personality, and we cannot have him living at home any longer. He's been addicted to gambling, opiates, and pills. He's in a sober home in Florida now and continues to call us every day. I will not speak with him until I know he is extremely serious with his program. I have been down this path numerous times. What are your suggestions? I have been in groups and read many books and speakers. I've heard Chris Herren speak at the schools 4 times, and he really is powerful. My son at one time, I took him to hear Chris right before he went to rehab.
Okay. I think this is one area where I don't know that I can give you a clear-cut answer on exactly what you need to do. You have to go by how you feel and just try to be clear with your son about what you need in order to feel safe having a conversation. Is it, I need you to be in a program for at least 2 weeks, or, if you can set a goal for him to reach so he knows he will have your attention if he reaches it, that can be very motivating for him. But I feel like what I'm getting behind that isn't that you don't want to speak to your son. It's that it's been so painful for you that you're setting that boundary to protect yourself. And I just want you to know that that's okay. It's okay for us to be in a place where we need a break and we need silence and we need peace, okay? But try to give him something to work towards so he knows when he gets your attention back. It kind of ties into what I was saying earlier. Do you have anything to add, Maureen?
Yeah. What about going back to some old-fashioned letter writing?
Yeah, that's good.
And before, I agree with you completely that that's what you should be doing. But to write back and forth, because it takes a little while to receive a letter. and he would know that it would take you a while to receive a letter. So this, having to wait for something is not a bad lesson to learn, both in the goal and in the correspondence. I think that, not answering without any plan to when he can connect again by phone, how many times, maybe he can call once a week eventually, and for now we're going to write letters or something like that. But I think that you don't want to leave him out on his own without him knowing, though, that there's another option.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I also want to add, I was thinking as you were talking that most people who struggle with substance use disorder want immediate gratification. That's part of the reason why they use. They're not used to sitting. The anxiety that we have to sit in when we wait for things it's very difficult. And most of us learn the skills to be able to manage that as we mature. Like when I think of when I was 16 versus 43, 16, I couldn't sit in it for 5 minutes, but at 43, I've learned to be able to manage that. Most of our loved ones can't manage that anxiety, right? They have learned this immediate gratification that they get from the drug. So making them wait is actually beneficial. And, not in doing it in a way where you're like, I'm not sure. I'm not going to answer that right now. I'm not sure. I need some time to think. And they're incredibly uncomfortable. And typically we want to take that pain away. So we will answer right in the moment. And they're, on us, right? And we just want it to stop. But if you can try to step into a place where you say one of your standard answers, especially if you're not sure how you feel about the question, I need a little time to think about that. I'll get back to you, when I make my decision or after I've thought about it. Just make sure you circle back and don't just ignore it, because they won't believe you going forward if that's what you're doing. But allowing them to sit in that a little bit is helpful, especially if they're in early recovery. That's the skills that they need to develop. And oftentimes in early recovery, they have supports around them that can help them develop those skills. So that's the time to do things like that. Not that it's not all the time. It's a very helpful tool all the time. But if they're in early recovery, it can be very helpful.
I like it.
Another anonymous 18-year-old son is away in a therapeutic boarding school. When we speak, he speaks of coming back to his old life. I know from reading and learning this does not work for him. What's my role in my son's life now telling him this? You want to tackle that one?
It's so hard with younger people. It really is, because, they're technically kind of, we have control, but we really don't. At that age, it's very difficult to have control. Hopefully the longer he's there, the more he'll realize that he needs to change his friends and he needs to change the patterns in his life, and it'll be less and less that need to go back to all those same things, because he'll learn, hopefully.
Yeah.
But that's going to be tough.
It's going to be really tough. From my perspective, working with teenagers and having one, I can tell you that when we act as if we can control their behavior, they're more likely to push back. So, and it's very difficult for us as parents not to step into or not get into I get to make the decisions because I'm the parent part, like I have control, because we do want to believe we have control. It makes us feel safer. But the reality is starting fairly early, much earlier than we want to believe, we start losing control. So I like to make it more about just admitting that and saying that out loud. I know I don't have control over what you do after this. What you're saying makes me nervous because I love you and I don't want to see you ruin your life. But I know I have no control over that. So I hope you would think about that very carefully before you make those decisions. So just acknowledging that they can make a bad decision if they want, because they can. We really can't control that. And we can talk about how it will break our heart, right? But we can't say you can't do that. And the more you say, especially to a teen whose neurology, Kevin posted the link to the teen brain webinar that we did at the Herren Project. If you want more information on this, watch that. But the teen brain itself is not it's wired to just, when you say can't, it's wired to say I can. So the more we say can't, the more they're going to say, watch me. So if you can align more with them and get them to see that they can make any bad decision that they want and you can't control it, not that there won't be consequences, but also making sure that they're aware that whatever consequences come, you won't remove. Like I've told my son 1,000 times, he's only 13, so we haven't gone down this road yet. But dude, you ever get arrested, don't call me. Don't waste that one phone call on me because I'm not picking you up till the next day. So find someone else, right? It's a joke now. If it actually ever happens, it won't be a joke. But the reality is I'm not going to take consequences away for him. I'm going to allow him to feel it. And that's not going to be easy for me. And circle back with me in 4 years and let me know if I've actually been able to stick to my word. But we got to try to let them face the consequences and at least make sure they know that you're not removing them. Because if they think you'll remove the consequence, they're going to be less likely to think it through.
As a teacher, as somebody who was a teacher for a while, the parents, I don't think it certainly wasn't like this when I went to school. And I know that it wasn't like this when, even not even maybe 10 years ago, but the parents were 20 years ago, parents get in the middle of everything, even at school. We start not letting our kids suffer the consequences very, very early on. Yeah. Parents trying to change grades, parents in there, my child would never do that. And that's a tough lesson to learn. Guess what?
Right. And I love that you just brought that up, because one of the things that I know is that removing or forcing my child's D to become a B is actually going to hurt him more in the long run than a D on his transcript. Right. So we're kind of in this place where we feel like the only time a child can succeed is when they're in high school. And if they blow it in high school, it's it for them for the rest of their lives. And what we end up doing is, by trying to fix the things, is reinforcing really bad behavior, and they don't have the skills to be able to manage life. I'd rather my kid fail high school and learn how to succeed through that failure and end up making something of his life than me going in and fixing everything so he passes high school and then he doesn't have the skills to manage life, because life is hard. Like it's hard for all of us.
I got it's not a little off topic, off the addiction topic, but about kids. My son wanted to, when in 9th grade, tried out for the baseball team. And this is not my son with the addiction problems, but when my daughter went through school, she had lots of learning difficulties. So I was always in there, always fighting her battles. And I think I had always done that. And with him, last child of 4, right? Yeah. He wanted to get in the baseball team so badly. He was the last one cut. And the kid that wasn't cut right before him was one of these kids in a very small town where his parents volunteered. They were part of everything they did. And my son was a better player. He just was. He wasn't great, but he was a better player. And he was devastated. Right. And he came home and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, okay, I said, who are you? This is a moment where you decide who you are. Yep. And you're either going to be the person that now works really hard and gets on next year, or you're going to be the person that curls up in a ball every time something bad happens. And on his application to medical school, they asked him, what's an experience that kind of shaped you? And that's what he wrote about.
Wow. See, that's so important to bring that up. That's a great example.
Yeah, it's like that's just.
We want to wrap them in bubble wrap and remove the pain. And when we remove the pain, they don't develop the skills. And then they get to life, and life sucks sometimes. Sometimes it's awesome and amazing, and sometimes it's awful.
Absolutely.
And the more we've suffered in life, the more skills we have to manage the tough times. Yeah. So we always have to remember that.
He developed a love for the gym. He worked out every day. He got somebody like a coach. I mean, he did all of these things in order to get on the baseball team in 10th grade. And it changed who he was. Yep. And if I ever did one really right thing as a parent, that was it. It took me 4 kids to get to it. But
well, none of us are perfect parents. That's for sure.
Now you can say that. Use that, please. Anybody with young kids.
We do need to move on, but this topic always reminds me of the story of the lobster, which is that the only way that a lobster knows that it grows is when it becomes super uncomfortable in its shell, and it sheds its shell and it grows a new one. Yeah. But if the lobster never became uncomfortable, it would never grow. And I don't think humans are any different. We have to become super uncomfortable. The pain is what drives the growth. So when we're removing the pain, we're actually stunting growth. So as much as it breaks my heart to see my child in pain or see a loved one in pain, I can't remove that, because that's exactly what he needs to change and to become a better person and to be able to manage life better.
Yep, absolutely.
So, okay, Shari, what if you have asked them to leave and they have no job and no place to go and they are dying, and said if you love them you won't do that? Oh boy. Yeah, that's a frequent question. I've been there myself. I think that by allowing them or him to continue to stay in the home, and for him to be warm and comfortable and fed at this point at your, you know, at your, what word am I, expense, right? Is probably leading it to be less likely for him to actually choose recovery.
That's so tough. I had I agree with you, and I was able to do that in my own life, but I also realized that some people are not there. And I worked with a woman that she just wasn't there. Her son had overdosed 3 times in the house, and she was able to Narcan him. So she now felt like she was the only one that could save his life. It was a nightmare. But I did suggest, if you can't do that, then take the comfortable part out. Right. So I told her, take all the doors off the hinges, because you don't want him overdosing behind a closed door. There's things that, you know, there were other things too that I said, make these changes so that the house is uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for everybody, unfortunately, but she was already uncomfortable. He might as well be uncomfortable as well. So, you know, if you're not there yet,
which is totally okay.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, Maureen. You know, whatever you do, whatever you set, you know, maybe you stop making meals for him. Maybe you start grocery shopping just for yourself.
Yep.
There's all kinds of little things that we can do. If you're paying for things for him, stop doing that instead of saying you have to get out. Right now is a particularly difficult time because of COVID. So we all have to be aware of that. It's a very difficult time to make these choices. It's even harder than in typical times. So.
I think that some people that might have said you have to leave are hesitating to do that. Right. And I think there are young people that are taking advantage of that with their parents because they know they won't.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So this just adds a whole nother dimension to it.
Right. Makes it more difficult.
So the next one is how do you connect with them when they're isolating?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I think that pushing when somebody is in that place. So isolation is a part of substance use, but it's also a part of depression. And a lot of times, or anxiety. So a lot of times when we push for somebody, when we're like, stop isolating, you need to come out, we're actually making it less likely for them to answer the phone when we call. So I think the best way to connect is to meet them on their level. You know, do you want me to come over and lay under a blanket and watch a movie? You know, whatever it is, I'm not gonna tell you we have to go to the beach. I'm not gonna force you to leave unless you want to. Always know that option's there, because I would love to take a walk on the beach with you. But I just want to be able to see you and look at you and make sure you're okay. And make sure they know that you love them. Because this is what happens. The more we push, the more they isolate. So try not to be the pusher. Try just to be the lover. I love you. I'm here. If you'll let me in, I'll come in. I won't ask you to do a thing. I just want to sit with you for an hour. Okay, is that okay? Make it more about you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Can you do that for me? I just want to see you and give you a hug. You know, I'll stay 5 minutes and just open that little crack. You know, and if you can get in that way, it's a tough one though.
It's a very tough one, and it's really scary when that's happening. Yeah. How do you explain to a spouse, pretty new to recovery, 18 months, that building back trust is not easy, even though they are in active recovery? There were so many lies that I believed and sounded so real. I sometimes get anxious that I can't trust what I think that what I'm seeing and hearing now. That is the hardest for me now, trusting the recovery. Oof, it usually starts to really crop up about a year. That's what I've seen. And it is a common experience from one experience to the next. I was a spouse as well. I've been there. I think that one of the things that as spouses we have to do is, first of all, goes right back to us managing our own anxiety and trying not to control. Because when we're trying to control, that's when we really get in the power struggle. So it's hard. It's really hard to do. But being able to take a step back and be like, okay, just so you know, if you use, I will find out eventually, right? And when that happens, there will be a consequence. I am not going to, whatever it is, I'm not going to stay in this relationship. I'm not going to feel safe in this relationship. If you're not ready to leave, you can use those terms. If you're using, so just know there will be a consequence. And then just allowing them to make their choices and trying to focus more on yourself and managing your own anxiety. But also, one of the things that I say all the time to people is trust isn't something you're just granted because you decide you deserve it. Okay. Trust is something that you prove. So I would, and you don't need to get in an argument over that. You just say, I'm not sure when I'm going to trust, but I can tell you if you keep doing what you're doing today, it will happen. So just keep doing this. And eventually it will happen. But right now I'm not there yet. And that's okay for you not to be there yet. Totally okay.
And I would ask her what she's doing for herself.
Yeah.
You know, so are you meditating? Are you going to yoga? Are you doing things that bring you back in your body? Because that's traumatizing. That's trauma that she experienced. So I think that she might want to start thinking about, you know, just because we're anxious doesn't mean we're wrong either. Sometimes we're
Very true.
You know, we have a reason to be anxious, or sometimes we've just lived in that anxiety for so long and that trauma for so long that we don't know how to let it pass. So it may be that she needs to start doing her own work on her own recovery.
Yep, completely agree. I think one of the things that sets us free, especially as spouses, when we've been codependent with somebody for so long, we don't know how to exist without them. We actually don't know how to exist without their problem either. So we have to manage that. And the best thing that you can do is get yourself to a place where you are happy regardless of their choices. And that is totally rainbows and unicorns land, but it's a goal, right?
It's a good goal too. For everybody.
Right. Because what happens is once we have a life of our own and we're not so focused on them, that means that if they make poor choices, we are okay with existing without them. If they're not able to treat us respectfully, kindly, and with, you know, compassion and love, then we can actually, it's a lot easier for us to leave when we need to. And we become more desirable to them when we're not all up in their stuff all day long, when they have to wonder where we are and what we're doing and who we're with, and they see us come home happy and we didn't spend the day with them. Let me tell you, things start to shift, because that's when they're like, hold on a second, I better behave or she could leave.
Yeah.
And that's where we want to be.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so I'm going to pop over to Facebook from Michael. I want to maintain contact with my son, but he's living with a gal and her family that he uses with. I can only reach him through her cell phone. I don't want to be entangled in that dynamic, yet I want him to know we miss him and love him. He's isolated from all extended family. Any suggestions on how to keep him in touch, engaged? Oh, that's rough, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You have any? I mean, I think that, you know, when they're living in a situation like that, and it's almost like, it reminds me almost cultish, right?
Yeah.
When someone is now, you know, cut off from their own family, I think that it's really important to, even if it's only through her cell phone, that they still keep reaching out, because he needs to know that they're still there.
Right. Yep. I agree. I also think this kind of goes back to learning how to sit in the anxiety, because unfortunately, this is not something that you can control or change. He has to want to change this. He needs to know that you're there and you love him. Typically what I see is eventually life gets too tough and they don't want to live like that anymore. It's when they reach this idea of anhedonia, which is a big fancy word, but basically what it means is that they're no longer get joy out of use, but the unfortunate part is they no longer get joy without use either. So they're in this place of, no matter which way they turn, is pain. And that's usually when they reach out to the people that they trust and that they love to say, I can't do this anymore. I'm yelling uncle. Doesn't mean it's the last time that they're ever going to use. They might end up having more issues after that. But typically that's when they get on the road to wanting recovery, which to me is incredibly important and a big deal, whether they're fully sober or not. But I don't think you can change that, and I don't think you can control it. You have to learn how to manage your own anxiety. And I'm so sorry, because this is an awful place to be. And this is where radical acceptance comes in, which is it's something that just seems so big and huge that I don't want to accept it. I want to fight against it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's not something that you can control right now. So I agree with Maureen. I don't think sending, I love you, please let them know we're thinking of them. Please let them know we care. And don't get any more than that. Don't ask questions. If it's her cell phone, don't ask questions. Don't get into discussions with her or anything. Please have him call us. Just things like that, like very closed-ended statements.
Yeah, it's just going to be uncomfortable on them. But let's face it, we're all uncomfortable 24 hours a day when we're going through this. So it's just one more uncomfortable thing.
Yep. Absolutely. How does one go forward with getting someone to leave who won't leave? Authorities, unfortunately. That's the only thing you can do. And that's usually, especially if it's somebody you love, it's something you don't want to do. But I don't think you can make someone leave that doesn't want to leave. You either can leave yourself, if that's possible, which is what I ended up having to do in my situation. I left the house that I absolutely love, ended up losing it as a result, but it was still worthwhile for me because he wouldn't leave and I didn't have the energy to fight that. And it was so much better for my son and I to just go. That was an option for me. It might not be for you. So if it's not, then you're going to have to muster up the energy to fight, and it's probably going to take a legal battle. Do you have any other advice?
No, that's exactly what, that's perfect. Okay, Jean Smith. I'm a mother, poster mom for codependency, but last few years I'm doing much better. He is an adult, 10 years plus. 10 years plus substance abuse, has been in and out of many treatment programs, sections, homelessness, time in prison in the beginning years, and past several years he is holding a job and doing medical assistant, methadone, but still uses. It goes round and round. I recently let him move back home thinking he was not using. He stayed here a year. I found needles here and there. His agency says he's at less risk on their scale at home than on the streets, even though I now know he has been using on and off here. It's difficult to live in my home with him. He has recently moved out to an apartment on his own.
Good.
I'm hoping he does not return to live with me, and my anxiety is through the roof, and not knowing what the future will be with his job or income. I don't want him homeless, but I know he has nowhere to live. Well, he does have somewhere to live. He just moved into his own apartment, but mom is still kind of caught up in this idea that you are responsible for him, which makes him think that you're responsible for him. So I think that, Jean, we go through these things and we have to recover from this too. This is why these groups are so good. This is why working with a family recovery coach is good, because sometimes this isn't easy. I mean, if you've been doing this for 10 years with him, there's no reason to think that, okay, oh, that's right, this is wrong and this is a good idea, and now I will change everything. Because your responses are, we do a lot of things just on this is what we've always done. And again, you've experienced a lot of trauma with this, and the trauma is, all these things that you do are keyed into the trauma that you have experienced. So that is just your reaction, is to think. If you read over your own question, you're already envisioning him homeless again, and that may or may not happen, but it's much more likely to happen if he thinks he has a backup plan of living with you. So you have control over that. You have no control over him.
Right. I would just add, Jean, read the book Saving Jake if you can get it. If you I'm happy to send you a copy if you email me. It's a great book. It's pretty much exactly what Maureen was just saying. It's a mother's journey through exactly what you're going through, and how she went from being the person that always allowed him home to how she kind of helped him move forward, which means her pulling back. So we have a ton of questions and we have to move through them, but at the end of the day, I just want you to remember one thing. Every time you fix, every time you allow him to come home, you are just reinforcing that he's incapable of doing it for himself. So what I would way more like to see you do is be like, wow, that stinks. So what are you going to do about it?
Absolutely.
Be a part of his journey, walk beside him, but don't walk in front of him anymore, okay? He needs to know that he is capable of manning his own life without you, and that every time he's able to do that, you're going to raise his self-esteem, which is exactly what we want to see, because that is the antidote to substance use disorder.
And keep reinforcing that too. You know, I know you can do this because I've been watching you, and look at, now you have all this sober time, you've gotten to the sober house, you were able to do that, even, you know, under bad circumstances. We now know that they were able to do, they know they're able to do it. We believe in you, and I think you can do it again. You know, sometimes we have to fake it until we can.
Yeah,
really
you don't need to actually believe it. None of you guys have to believe any of this. Just try it and see if it works, okay? So we have another one. How can I help my husband get back on track after his relapse? He stopped drinking 9 years ago and then started up again about a year ago. He checked himself into a rehab in December, but didn't stay clean very long. He is so mad at himself for picking up after 8 years. He just can't seem to get past that, even though he has 100% support from me and the kids. He wants a personal life coach, but the cost for one is a lot. Can you suggest resources that aren't so pricey, even a virtual connection? I don't know if you have health insurance, but you can, therapists, counselors, you'd go through, you know, a personal life coach is going to charge cash. Where a therapist or a counselor will go through your insurance and you'll only be responsible for copay. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that. It's not cash related. It's something that you can bill right out to your insurance. But above and beyond that, the first sentence is really what sticks out for me. How can I help my husband get back on track after his relapse? I can't help him do anything. He can help him get back on track after his relapse, okay? All you can do is be a support, be caring, be loving, and let him know you believe in him, and keep your boundaries firm. If his behavior is encroaching on your happiness at any point, you make sure you put a boundary around that. Have anything to add, Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, I think she also, if she does want to give him a resource, he has to call for himself and he has to figure it out for himself. But a recovery coach. I mean, very often our community, like there are community recovery community centers that have free recovery coaches. And some people's Mass Health is covering recovery coaches now. But even if, you know, they're not that expensive. It's not like a therapist. And these people help somebody get back on track. They're the ones that can show them the way. And then he probably needs to get into meetings and get a sponsor. Those are the people that can help if somebody else is going to help outside of himself.
Absolutely. And I just want to throw out there, as a social worker myself, we have a tendency, if you're struggling with insurance or a lack of insurance or a high deductible or a high copay, don't tell anyone I told you this, but we're softies at heart. And we have a tendency to do sliding scale fees that will work for you. So, you know, don't hesitate if he's interested to have him reach out and ask the question, because most of the time you'll find someone who's willing to work with you financially. You want to read the next one?
Sure. You know what? I'm like simple.
Andy, my 23-year-old.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in 5th grade again when you lost your place because you weren't paying attention. My 23-year-old son has been living back home for 5 months after being away a year in rehab. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And sober living with 2 relapses during that time. I'm sorry. He also lived for 3 months on his own and with a little marijuana use. When he returned home, mutual boundaries set, and he said while being home, he would remain 100% sober. Overall, he's done well and continued with college while home. I go by his actions, but sometimes I wonder when he closes his door before bedtime, is he getting high? Although he does his responsibilities and pleasant to live with, other than talking to people that he has met along the way, he doesn't participate in any recovery groups. I have been stepping back and letting him be in charge of his recovery, so I mentioned suggestions only once, but state it's up to you. He knows anytime I can drug test him, which I'm thinking about doing just to know. But if he tests positive for anything with this pandemic, I wouldn't be prepared to make him leave. So do you think I should let it go and not do drug testing?
Whew, that's hard. I think that's a decision you have to make. I'm leaning more towards, if you know you can't make him leave and you've already set the boundary that he would have to, that maybe waiting until you feel a little bit more safe following through on that boundary to test him. I think you're doing an amazing job, though. I just want to make sure I say that.
Yeah.
It's not an easy place to be. If, I would have a conversation with him and just let him know that these are the things that you're worried about, and that that's your work, but you just want to let him know what you're struggling with so you can help each other along the way. And anything he can do to reassure you that he's making good choices would be you'd be grateful for, so you're acknowledging that you're the one with the issue. It's not him, but it would be helpful for him to, let you know what's going on. And I would, even if that includes a relapse, because to be honest with you, if somebody comes to me and says, I slipped and I smoked marijuana and I'm so sorry and I'm getting right back on the bandwagon tomorrow, that's a completely different thing than I've been smoking for 6 weeks and I find out because I, find a bowl underneath your bed or whatever. Right. So, just letting him know that if he does have a slip, that it would be more beneficial to your relationship and to your ability to move forward if he tells you and is honest about it, and that you would support him in getting back into recovery. But as for him going to groups, you already know this. You can't make him.
And groups aren't for everybody.
True.
If he's going to, my daughter, I always compare it to her because she's, because that's what I know, but she goes to church and she's active in her church, and she goes to a therapist. In the beginning, she was going 3 times a week to a therapist. So, but she's just never done well in meetings. Mm-hmm. So it's his recovery. So if it's one thing, that's if it's working, but if it's not working, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to say to the people you love, you know what? It would make me feel better if you were going to a meeting.
Well, and I think you're right about this too. It's maybe she should be, we have to work on our own recovery too. Yeah. So that's very important, and that we're not just, and it's so easy to be paranoid about this because we're terrified. So we don't want to be watching everything that they do. That's not our job. And, I don't know. I had a conversation with her earlier when I really thought this was it, and she was really doing well, and she seemed to be motivated. And I said, listen, you don't have to call me every day, or when I answer, you don't have to answer it if you're busy, but if you could get right back to me, because I'm still not there yet. I'm still working on myself, and I go right back to when you didn't answer and I knew what the reason was. And this is, like you said, this is about me, not about you. So I think that's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, I love that. My girlfriend's husband is working, but is currently using coke and gambled his inheritance away. She also has a 10-month-old baby. She gave up her job and does not know what to do. The husband is 43 years old, and this is his second marriage. I just also want to throw out there, you guys, we're not accepting any more questions at this point. We only have 2 minutes left, so we'll try to get through these if we can. So first of all, I want to throw out there that, be careful of where you're placing yourself in this dynamic. It's okay to be there for a friend and to listen and to, offer feedback, but just try not to get sucked into the whole dynamic, because that's just our own codependency. And if it's hard for me to fix it when I'm in it, it's going to be impossible for you to, if you're trying to fix it, it's just going to get very frustrating. But I think the best thing, if it were my friend, the best advice I could give is to encourage her to work on herself. Yeah. Learn about substance use disorder, get herself to some meetings. We had mentioned all the types of meetings earlier. Get a therapist. Those sorts of things are really all you can do. And then just listen and tell her you care. I love you. I wish I could fix it for you. As a counselor myself, I can't fix this for anybody. I just offer my feedback and tell them that, you know, offer some validation and some support, and that's all I can do.
Yeah. I'll take one more. My son is in his first month of recovery. He feels good telling me things, but I know deep down some are lies. Do I tell him I know he is lying, or be a listener and keep rolling my eyes when he hangs up? I don't want to push him away, but I don't want him to think he's manipulating me. I think it depends on whether he's saying those things to get something from her.
Yeah.
You know, that he may grow out of that. And again, my daughter used to say the most unbelievable things, and they were definitely lies. And I think she was doing it to get me upset. But we can go back with, well, what are you going to do about that? What can you do about that? Keep putting it back on him if it's a problem. But if he's just telling you things, hopefully he'll stop.
It's fairly common in early recovery for people to do that. Typically speaking, they're not lying to you, they're actually lying to themselves. So if it's things about him and his capabilities and what's going on in his life, and you know they're gross exaggerations, it's more because his self-esteem is so low that he feels he has to invent things in order to be a decent human, right? Because he doesn't feel like he is. So when it comes to that, I wouldn't challenge it too much, because all that's going to lead is more bruising of the ego and more more feelings of self-hatred. So but like Maureen said, if it has something to do with him trying to manipulate you, that's a different story. Then you just put your boundaries up. You just say, no, I've thought about it, but I can't do that today. But what are you going to do? What else can you do? What other options do you have? And put it right back on him. Last question, how do you help change your son's perception of marijuana use? It's being harmful for him to function as a 23-year-old. He suffers from anxiety, depression, and has anger issues. You can't change his perception. I think one of the things, if you want to have an open, honest discussion with him, one of the things that you have to go into it with is start asking him what it's giving him. Because we have a tendency to get in and just tell him it's bad and it's wrong and it's going to ruin their lives. And the reality is he knows that already. My guess is he's not stupid. He's 23 years old. He's been around for a while. We've been educating people on this for many years. He probably knows, although public perception at this point is that it's a very safe drug because it's legal. But the reality is that this is giving him something. If he suffers from anxiety, depression, and has anger issues, this is probably helping him get through every day. So I would encourage you to have a conversation with him about the why, and ask him if there's any other options that he can think of to help him manage those things without the need for marijuana. Because one of the things that I say to people is we just have to agree that there's a dark side to the marijuana use. I know it's helpful in many ways to you, but there is also a dark side. Is there anything you can do that doesn't have a dark side that might help you with those things as well? So instead of challenging the marijuana, ask him if there's anything else he might be able to do to assist him that doesn't have such a dark side. Do you have anything to add, Maureen?
No, I think that's a great response, and that to a tough question.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. And unfortunately, lots of us are there with our kids today because of the fact that it's so socially acceptable right now to smoke marijuana. So thank you, everybody. This was so fun.
Awesome.
Very sad stuff, obviously, but both Maureen and I think love doing this and trying to help people with these issues. If you have any questions for either one of us, you can reach out to us. Kevin had posted my email address, I believe, in the chat. You can find Maureen if you join her Facebook group at Magnolia New Beginnings. Anything you want to add?
No, more than happy to, be there if somebody needs it, as I know you are.
Yep, absolutely. And be safe, everybody, and keep your eyes peeled. We'll be doing this again probably within the next 3 weeks to a month. Right, Maureen? Sound about right to you?
Sounds right.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.